I'm Matt, this is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and this is the last video in a massively long series on the Sermon on the Mount. As a quick heads up, just as a note, on patreon.com/TMBH, there's a handful of people who support this program, which is ridiculously generous and nice. And I made a deal with them that if a certain number of people jumped on and started supporting, that I would get back together with Aaron, and we would just do a little series like this. So this is the fruit of that. If you've enjoyed this series, thanks for that goes to Aaron for being willing to be my guest, and goes to the patrons of this program for supporting this and making it possible for us to do the travel and get the right equipment set up to be able to make a video like this.
It's been a lot of fun.
If you're the kind of person who likes to support things on the internet, you are allowed to support the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Patreon.com/TMBH. But here's the deal, you are also allowed to not. And either way, I'm just very glad you're here. Thanks for being a part. Thank you for being a part of this. The conversation has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for the chance, man.
Yeah, Sermon on the Mount, home stretch, very last passage. This whole thing wraps up with 4 warnings, if you will, where Jesus is vigorously stressing to people, watch out for this, watch out for this, watch out for this. Really get this right. It's like he's saying this is the most important thing ever, and he's going to stress it 4 different ways to make the point.
Okay.
So the first of those warnings, how do you read it? What is it and how do you read it?
Well, that's interesting that you're taking that this is a 4th warning. I've not read it that way before, but I'm evaluating it, and you might be onto something.
I might not.
The section here is the golden rule. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Again, this is the summary of the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And then he goes by, here it is. You're right. There's the 4th one. I goofed up.
No, it's all right.
So the golden rule, the golden rule there is kind of on the front end. So enter through the narrow gate, wide. For the gate is wide and easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. The gate is narrow and is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So the connection of those 2 ideas.
See, the way your Bible divides that up is weird. I can't believe that they put those 2 thoughts together. I don't think that makes any sense at all. I don't know what the ESV is doing.
That's
Here's
what
the
I was
thing.
thinking.
I think the golden rule, which I guess we didn't say out loud, but I was alluding to it in the last one, is part of the idea of Jesus coming alongside and being like, you got this. In fact, all this moral stuff seems really complicated.
But it makes sense to me too. That's what you didn't say it specifically, but yeah. So
yeah, it's part of that. It's part of that.
The lesson here
thing
is that in these biblical passages, the verses and headings are not necessarily...
well, they're definitely not inspired.
They're not inspired. They weren't part of the original audience, so they just jacked me up. Tell us about the narrow way.
I'm not kidding. So the golden rule, I think, is advisor, buddy, Jesus coming along and being like, hey, stick with me. We got this. I realize that all of this moral stuff is a lot to think about. Here's the most basic principle. Here's just a maxim to help you get this thing right. And then you get your famous golden rule.
It seems to go with the relational.
Yes, I agree. And then the next thought, I think, is this exhortation to enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. So the warning is, getting this wrong is incredibly easy. In fact, getting this wrong is just the default setting of being a person. So what is the gate in this analogy, in your opinion?
The way is hard that leads to life. I think the gate is finding the access or the key or the only way to get to the kingdom, and that's him.
How do you find it?
I think he has to reveal it to you, but he doesn't say that here.
I think stick with me.
Yeah.
I think it just goes back to the same principle. I mean,
anybody that's out there, anybody who's been listening to this point, it's him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the theological debate we could have about exactly who initiates that or how it's initiated would be an enormous rabbit trail. And so respectfully, I'll just skip that.
We did that in Ephesians already.
Yeah. And it was a treat.
It was a rabbit trail too.
But here, I think the theme is really simple. Like if you want to get on this path that's really hard to find and that's narrow and small, stick with me. The Robert Frost poem, the most famous poem in the history of American poetry, the two roads, two paths diverged in a yellow wood, whatever it is. I mean, it's the road not
And
traveled.
I chose the road less taken, and that has made all the difference.
Yeah, and people usually read that as, I struck out and did something brave and different. But at the end, I mean, what Frost is saying is like, yeah, and someday I'll be recounting all of this with a sigh that I picked the one less traveled. I mean, he says both roads really actually kind of looked the same. They're both equal for wear. So the poem isn't quite what people think. I think what he's actually saying is, you're going to apply a narrative to whichever of these world roads that you pick, but there's a resignation in that poem, not a pluckiness. And the resignation is just, they all kind of end up in the same place. I think that poem has resonated with people so much because on the surface it looks like pluckiness. But if you look closer, as you age, there's some deep and even kind of sad truth about the nature of life and the world system in there. I think what is remarkable about Jesus' description of the two paths is that the path that is smaller and less often taken actually leads to a different destination. There is a different end game in mind. There are a different set of values, a different set of rules on that path, and the results are different. But once again, how are you going to find it? Stick with me. Stick with me. Yes, and by me I don't mean me. I mean Jesus. I wouldn't necessarily recommend sticking with me. I say right after I ask people to support the program on Patreon.
Stick with him, sort of.
Sort of, kind of. I don't know.
Just not too far.
I don't know. Okay, so I'm about to a question here in just a second, but I think it would be easy to imagine this passage describing a person in a pristine Eden forest looking down one road and seeing like the bad guys from the Chick tracts with their blue jeans and their sunglasses and their rolled up sleeves and cigarettes and their swears down there.
The Chick tracts.
Satan's down there and everything else. And down the other one are like angels and people with blouses and ties.
Do people still know what Chick tracts are?
I hope not. You're going to want to Google that. And it's just a matter of choice. You're in a completely pristine environment and you're going to pick one or the other. But the next warning indicates that you're not really just standing alone in a wood entirely making a decision apart from influence. There's stuff designed to wreck you. So here we come back to the difficult question of discernment. And, well, what do you glean from the passage about how to tell the difference between the people who are aids on this journey and picking which way to go, and the people who are hindrances on this journey and picking where to go?
This is a whole book, so we're zeroing in on 3 chapters. The fruits. Paul gives.
Yeah, he gives a whole list, doesn't he?
He gives lists in several places. It was a common practice in the ancient world to do virtue and vice lists, and Paul does both.
Yeah, the acts of the sinful nature are obvious.
Yeah, so Galatians 5 is the fruit of the Spirit. But he has lists in both Colossians and Ephesians.
They're almost the same book. It makes sense.
They're very similar in some ways, yeah. Colossians is probably more specific and Ephesians are more general, but yeah.
Okay, so you're saying there's other places
we could go to figure that out.
Do you remember, okay, so you've read John, the gospel writer. Little known fact, he actually wrote additional books that are in the Bible. Now you got to go way to the back, but he wrote some letters to people, and those are in there. Have you ever read 1 John or heard of it?
I've heard of it.
Okay.
Tell me about it.
It's actually really good. Sorry. So 1 John, is John writing to, he's an old man. He's writing to a bunch of young Christians who are getting screwed up by people who are trying to mash Greek dualism together with Jesus. And it changes Jesus, so it doesn't work. Maybe they're trying to be nice, and these false teachers think they're being helpful. Maybe they're big jerks who want to who knows what their motives are. But what John does is he offers this threefold test.
Okay.
And you remember this. And the threefold test is belief. So what are they actually saying? Does it sound like what Jesus said? Well, if it doesn't, And the second one is like, well, maybe their teaching checks out, but how do they treat people? Are they loving toward their brothers and sisters? Because like if you can't love your brother who you've seen, might be kind of hard to love God who you haven't seen. And then the third test, and I don't know if I've got the order right at all, but the third test is conduct. Like, is there any like behavioral fruit that indicates that they live by kingdom values? And I think the implication, since he repeats that threefold test repeatedly, is that a false teacher isn't one who fails all three tests. A false teacher is one who fails any of those tests. So there are lots of groups today that have just made up other versions of Christianity. And maybe they get two out of those three tests right, but there will always be this calamitous failure on one of those three tests.
The really scary thing is, and this is where false prophets, wolves in sheep's clothing, they use the same language. Okay.
Cameron just died. We're not quitting. But you know what? The one thing that everybody will say in defense of groups like that is, well, they're nice. Cool.
So here's
that's passing one part of the threefold test, sort of.
And here's the other thing.
Okay.
Are they really that nice? Or are they controlling?
Well, there is that element, isn't there?
So maybe they're not so nice.
That's problematic, isn't it? And
because
I'm not prepared to get out the broad brush, because I think there are exceptions in all directions.
Sure, fair enough.
But I am prepared to get out the broad brush on this topic, on the issue of false teaching. Like I those other two tests, conduct and being loving and kind, I think a good case could be made for a lot of groups that split off from Christianity and teach weird stuff, that they get that right. Maybe they're insidious reasons, maybe they're not, maybe it's a mixed bag. I'm cool with going benefit of the doubt there.
Okay.
But in plain black and white English, these groups fail the third test. It's not the same thing. It's a different Jesus.
No. Jesus
isn't God in this scenario. It's a totally different deal. And so here's the thing about this whole sheep and wolves thing. Do you think all the wolves know they're wolves?
No.
Why do you say that?
Very few people start out thinking, I'm going to start a cult and confuse people. People believe what they believe because they think they're right.
Yes. Overwhelmingly. Some people are just swindlers.
Few.
And they want women and money and power.
There's that too.
I guess I just left out women. Some women are swindlers and they want men and money and power. I don't know. It just doesn't happen as much.
It's a different kind of thing.
Yeah, you tip your cap to the ladies for not being into all of that.
A liar is never so convincing as when he believes his own lies. And that makes it doubly... Somebody that believes in their own version of reality can be really convincing because they're sincere.
Which means that we could be dangerous. Because I think this. I suppose I could be reading it all wrong. And here we are, turning on cameras, trying to help other people along in this conversation and share this conversation with others. Like, if we're wrong, I think we're the dangerous kind of wrong. Because I genuinely think it.
Sure, I agree, and it is scary. You know, James, I don't disagree at all. It is scary. James says those who teach should be, not many should presume to be teachers, because those who teach will be judged more strictly. It's a scary thing. There's a couple of curbs here, though. Well, one big one, and that not number one, the scriptures, but have we interpreted it right? Are we reading it right? Are we understanding it right? So we have the guardrails of the historic church, though. So
that's a great point.
The essentials of what we've said in these videos. I mean, I think you're right. I could be the next great heretic as well. I mean, we could. There's nothing that
I'd rather not be.
I'd rather not be. I'd rather have you tell me if I head down that road. And
you too.
So that's the
internet will tell you.
They will.
In all caps.
All caps, please.
You know what?
Because I don't get it.
If I'm that wrong, all caps is the least you can do.
Yeah. But if we're not in at least the ballpark of what the historic church has taught, and I'm talking about,
Within the boundaries of the creeds?
I was going to say, you have the teachings of the church fathers and the historic creeds. Those are, any Christian denomination affirms those creeds.
Yeah.
Protestant, Catholic.
Yeah, it's center-cut Christian theology.
Baptist.
Yeah.
Independent, angry fundamentalists.
Most Pentecostals.
Mm-hmm. Everybody will affirm those historic creeds.
Mm-hmm.
The group we were just talking about does not.
Well, or groups like that. There's several movements like this, and they all have the same.
Yeah.
They all have the same characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so we have. It's scary to be in our spot, and I have thought this more than once as I've prepared a message. And you come across something, you realize, and this is pretty radical. Do I really want to tell people this? And then you realize, this is what the church has always believed and taught.
And it's what the document seems to say.
It's what the document seems to say. And I stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us,
mm-hmm.
and in a huge way, and owe them a huge debt. And I had a guy call me once at my church office, and he was from New Jersey, and he went looking for. He just looked up Baptist churches, and got the pastor, and he told my secretary he wanted to talk to somebody about his life with God or something. I said, oh, well, that's interesting, sure.
Okay.
And so he starts talking to me, and I realize, oh, wait a minute, I know where you're from. What's the deal? What's up? And he goes, well, how can you believe in the Trinity? And
what?
And he called me out of the blue and wanted to argue with me
about the Trinity.
Yeah. Well, he had a theological axe to grind.
Well, clearly.
He was from Jehovah's Witness, and his. And my response was, well, I think the Scripture supports it, but the historic church has always believed it. And
Scripture normally supports
the Scripture normally supports, but I said, even if so his argument was, well, you're reading the Scriptures wrongly. Then me and the entire history of the Christian church, Protestant, Catholic, anybody, everybody.
Yeah.
And if you think that everybody else is wrong, and I mean everybody, and you're the only one that's got it right, be very afraid. Uh-huh. And I was blown away that this guy called up the Baptist church and wanted to argue
in North Dakota,
argue the Baptist pastor out of North Dakota.
Okay,
like,
never mind. I repent. I'm a Jehovah's Witness now.
Yeah.
How might I be Jehovah's Witness saved?
Yeah, like.
Yeah.
Okay, I repent. I agree. Thanks. Leave me alone.
So.
But that was my answer to him. Is like, hey, we all believe this. Yeah. So and that's an encouragement. That's a blessing. That we can stand on those other people's shoulders. I don't have to say anything new or novel.
And further.
And another thing.
Oh,
sorry. That's what he said.
We don't owe false teachers anything but basic grace and kindness that we owe all human beings, even if we really don't like their ideas or what they do.
Mm-hmm.
By no means is a passage like this saying, treat people who say things that are wrong horribly. Yeah. Seek out and be cruel and unkind to people who say things that are wrong. Mm-hmm. It's not even necessarily saying going and pick fights. It's saying you look out. Mm-hmm. Because you're not just standing at a crossroads, unmolested, trying to decide what to do with your soul. There are people actively messing with you who have a vested interest in getting you on the wrong path. Mm-hmm. And further, it is within the boundaries of basic kindness and decency toward other people. It is still more than fine, absolutely fine, even right, to ruthlessly call out bad ideas, to engage. I mean, people should be treated with utmost respect. Ideas are fair game. Let it rip. If it's so weak that it'll wilt that easily because someone dared to criticize it, it was a bad idea in the first place. And ideas are fair game.
You can criticize bad ideas and be decent to people.
Yeah, and I think
And that's hard for our
passages like
culture
this,
to get.
yes, passages like this though indicate that you're
You better.
You're supposed to. You're supposed to be able to say, these are kingdom values, this is Jesus, this ain't.
And you better be able to do that.
Yep.
Because there are people, if you're not willing to call it out, there are people working against you.
Yep.
It's a warning.
That simple.
Yep.
Okay. So you got the narrow and wide gate warning. You got the watch out for false prophets warning. That one we spent a bunch of time on. Here's the scariest passage in the Bible. Third warning, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I'll tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. 30-second answer. Is this salvation by works?
No.
You don't want to waste 5 seconds on that.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Why not?
Because it can't be, because that contradicts everything else he's said to this point.
Okay, so then what is...
It contradicts 5:3.
Do the will of my Father who is in heaven.
And
What
that's
is
reflective. Well, what is the will? The will is to believe on Jesus.
that? Yeah, I agree.
The will isn't to do the works. The point isn't so do we define our faith by what we do, or do we define our faith based on what Jesus has done? The litmus test of our Christianity is if we believe and follow Christ. The litmus test of my Christianity is not what I do. Now, there should be lots of things that flow from my faith in Christ, but that will always be flawed and a mixed bag, and I'll have to continue to say I'm sorry for things. And
Sure.
but yeah, to do the will of my Father is to believe in Him.
Quick aside, this is one of those places where if you want to ignore the clear thrust of the entire thing, 3 chapters worth of stuff, to get one verse and hold it up to somebody and be like, there, that's how the things are, right there.
And that's how wills
That's
work.
a great... Enough said. Well put. Very well put. So, real simply what Jesus is saying is, I feel like he's kind of grabbing people by the shoulders and being like, this really matters. Like, look, cold, hollow, external religious activity can be an act of atheism. Just because people do religious things doesn't mean they actually believe in any of this God stuff or this kingdom stuff. You can do that for social reasons and to score social points and get ahead in world terms. It's not hard to pull off, and it's not hard to dupe people, and you will impress people, and you will get your reward in full, which will be the people are impressed. But this narrow path is one that involves actually being invested in the values of the kingdom. And most of all, like, we've looked at 3 warnings. What's the solution to all 3? Narrow and wide gate? How are you going to find the narrow one?
Stick with Jesus.
True and false prophets? How are you going to know which ones are the wolves dressed up like sheep?
They won't look like Jesus.
Stick with Jesus. Yeah. And true and false disciples. How do you keep from getting to the end of everything and doing a lot of religious stuff and then having God be like, I didn't know you?
Stick with Jesus.
Yeah, the clear antithesis to this negative example is be known by God. Like, have a relationship with God. Last warning is about the guy that builds a house on a...
song.
Don't build your house on the sandy land. That's a salty
that
song.
one.
Really? How'd you do it?
Wise man built his house.
Oh, that one's famouser. Yeah. And this
And the
rain that came down
and the floods came up.
and then...
The house came tumbling down. I don't remember all the actions.
I don't know. I think that's the Velociraptor. No, it's the spitting.
That's the bullwinkle.
Spitting dinosaur.
That's the
from,
bullwinkle.
or that.
At the Sea of Galilee.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, all the gestures I was going to do to make fun of it had really offensive overtones. So you can see me like, that one isn't going to work. Abort. This joke has already failed. Bottom line is, Jesus is saying, look, as obviously stupid as it would be to throw your house up on a bunch of sand, build it on the rock. He's the rock, right? That's the implication. So then the solution, the way to avoid this enormously foolhardy mistake would be...
The way to avoid it?
Yeah.
This is the one who hears these words of mine and does them. Listen to what it said.
Yeah.
James says, but James, actually, the book of James
Is this?
reflects the Sermon on the Mount in, I couldn't tell you, 8, 10, a dozen places. The references are like, it's almost like, you wonder if he was there, really?
And whoever was behind the D-K, I kind of suspect they were here too.
Yeah,
and
I've read bits and pieces of that.
It's taking the Sermon on the Mount seriously and trying to figure out what to do with it in a church setting.
Yeah. So, James says, do not be merely hearers of the word, but be doers also. You know? If you don't, Jesus says, okay, now you're on the hook. Now I've explained it to you. Yes, it's hard, but I've explained it to you, and I've said, if you ask me to help you, ask, seek, knock, and I'm here. And I warned you, people are going to try to divert you, and now you know. And if you know all this and don't do anything differently, it's like building a house on sand.
The reason I say I think this is center-cut Christianity is because of how otherworldly it is. And maybe in isolation, I could write this off as the fantasies of an optimist, a really nice man with a really soft heart who's trying to help people confront bad things and give them positivity towards slightly better things. But it's the rest of the account. It's the rest of the document, the older stuff, the newer stuff, how it changed people, how many people saw the stuff that just defies explanation, that creates this composite that makes the whole dang thing really compelling to me. And ultimately, this series is not about, oh, the internet needs to believe this or not believe this. Ultimately, this series is about, we're friends and we think about this stuff, and this is what it sounds like when people like us of modest talents but enormous interest sit and kick stuff like this around. Ultimately, people will do with it what they're going to do with it.
Yeah.
Whatever the case, I think it's compelling. I think it's good. I think this has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah. Yes.
Again, I want to thank the patrons. I said that at the beginning of this video. I'm going to say it again. This is really humbling and kind of you. It's a weird thing that a bunch of people on the internet would be like, hey, I would like it if you would try to do more stuff. And so here's a little bit of support to help make that happen. I know everybody says thanks for that, but it really means a lot to me. So I don't know, I can't think of another word. Thanks. It's time to wrap it up. Dude, this was awesome.
Yep, thanks a lot. Thanks for the chance.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
This is my buddy Aaron.
This is my friend Matt.
Yep. 10-minute Bible Hour. Thanks for being a part of this.